first light, if I can even call it light anymore. The day begins with confusion and the taste of copper in my mouth. There is no sunrise here, only a gradual shift in the iridescent haze that never truly fades. This is life under Tzeentch's rule. A day-to-day existence so warped and unstable that I have to constantly remind myself what's real and what's just another lie planted in my head. I wake on what I think is my mattress and what I believe is my hab unit. But the walls are a different color than yesterday. Or were they always this shade of shifting blue? I can't remember. The air tastes like ozone and something sweet that makes my teeth ache. Around me, other shapes stir in the prismatic half-light, filtering through windows that weren't there when I fell asleep. Other civilians, or what were becoming, rising to face another cycle of the same twisted routine. Except it's never quite the same, is it? That's the horror of it. There's no vox horn this morning, or maybe there is, and I just can't hear it anymore over the whispers that never stop. The whispers that might be coming from outside, or might be coming from inside my own skull. I honestly don't know the difference anymore. My name is Callus Ven. I think. Sometimes I remember being someone else, someone with a different past, different parents, a different life entirely. The sorcerers tell us that's normal, that the architect of fate is simply showing us the infinite possibilities of what we could have been. But I know, deep in whatever part of me hasn't been rewritten yet, that it's a lie. They're changing our memories, our very identities, one thought at a time. 5 years ago, this was an imperial world. I was a data scribe in the administratum, maintaining records and processing tithes. I had a small office, a routine, maybe even friends, though I struggle to recall their faces now. Then the Thousand Suns came. Reality tore open above our planet, and everything that followed has been a descent into beautiful, terrible madness. You don't get used to it. That's what they don't tell you about living under the changer of ways. With Khorne, the horror is straightforward, blood and death. With Nurgle, it's decay you can see and smell. With Slaanesh, it's excess that consumes you. But Tzeentch makes you question whether you were ever really you to begin with. Every morning, if it even is morning, I have to check. I count my fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Still 5 on each hand. Good. I look for my reflection in the broken glass I keep hidden. Same face, mostly human. No extra eyes yet. I whisper my name 3 times to hear it from my own lips, to anchor myself to something real. Around me, in the communal hab block, others are doing similar rituals. The woman in the corner, I think her name is Selah, though it might have been Sarah yesterday. She's tracing the same pattern on the wall, over and over, murmuring numbers under her breath. The old man by the door tests his left arm, flexing it carefully, checking that it hasn't turned into something else overnight. Because that happens. You go to sleep with 2 normal arms and wake up with one that's covered in feathers or scales or worse. One that's phased slightly out of reality so you can see through it. The changes are usually small at first. A slight shimmer to your skin. Colors that seem wrong. Words you remember that you definitely never learned. It's only later, if you're unlucky, that the big transformations come. There's no breakfast here, no morning meal to start the day. Food comes when the sorcerers decide, and it's never quite food anyway. Sometimes it's a paste that tastes different to each person. Sometimes it's crystalline fragments that dissolve on your tongue and fill your mind with visions. And sometimes, worst of all, it's something that used to be food but has been changed so thoroughly that your body doesn't quite know how to process it. You eat because you must, because starvation is still starvation even in a place where reality bends. But you never enjoy it. The nourishment comes with a cost, hallucinations, more whispers, the creeping sensation that with every bite you're becoming less yourself and more what they want you to be. We assemble in the courtyard, what remains of it. The space has changed again. Yesterday it was a square plaza with broken imperial statues. Today it's an octagonal chamber with walls that angle in geometrically impossible ways, and the statues have been replaced by floating crystals that hum with psychic energy. I've stopped questioning these changes. Tzeentch delights in mutation, not just of flesh, but of space itself. The very architecture obeys his whims. An overseer, one of the Thousand Sons' mortal cultists, draped in robes covered in ever-shifting sigils, calls us to order. His face is hidden behind a mask of brass and crystal, and when he speaks, his voice echoes from multiple directions at once. The power structure under Tzeentch's rule is as fluid and unstable as everything else in this nightmare. Those who hold authority today might be transformed into mindless spawn tomorrow, their positions filled by whoever the architect of fate deems worthy in that moment. The former planetary elite, the nobles and governors who bent the knee when the Thousand Sons arrived, they changed themselves willingly in hopes of preserving some scrap of power. Many had been secret devotees of the Changer for years, practicing forbidden sorceries in hidden chambers, mutating themselves in controlled increments. Now they rule openly, their authority measured not by birthright or wealth, but by how much they've embraced change. They've renamed themselves with titles that celebrate transformation and knowledge. The Hierophant of infinite possibilities, the Magister of morphing forms, the Archseer of what might be. I've seen them announced at mandatory gatherings, and each time their appearances have altered. One lord, who was human last month now, sports 3 arms ending in crystalline claws, and speaks in harmonics that make your skull vibrate. A countess who prided herself on beauty has transformed her face into a constantly shifting kaleidoscope of features, never the same twice. They compete not in combat or decadence, but in wisdom, in mutations, in demonstrations of psychic power bestowed by Tzeentch. They hold courts of sorcery, where the noble families showcase their latest transformations or present scrolls of forbidden knowledge as offerings. I was forced to attend one such gathering, herded with hundreds of others, into what used to be the Cathedral of the Emperor's Light. The building itself had changed, its Gothic architecture warped into something that hurt to look at directly, all non-Euclidean angles and surfaces that seemed to exist in more dimensions than should be possible. The nobles lounged on thrones that floated without support, surrounded by warp flames of blue and pink that cast no heat but made your mind itch with alien thoughts. The sorcerers, the true masters, barely involve themselves in day-to-day governance. They're too occupied with their great works, their rituals and experimentations. But when they do appear, reality itself seems to hold its breath. I've seen a sorcerer of the Thousand Sons walk through our work detail once, his armor covered in scrollwork that moved and changed, his eye lenses glowing with eldritch power. He stopped, gestured at a worker at random, and the man simply changed. His body twisted, reformed, became something between human and bird and pure energy, screaming in voices that weren't entirely his own. The sorcerer observed this transformation with what might have been clinical interest, made a note on a floating data slate made of solidified light, and continued walking. The transformed worker, if he could still be called that, was taken away by cultists. We never learned his fate. We never learn anyone's fate. Then there are the cult magisters and change priests, the spiritual leaders of this warped civilization. Where the Imperium had the ecclesiarchy, preaching the Emperor's truth, we now have the cults of transmutation, the brotherhoods of infinite change, and countless other organizations spreading Tzeentch's doctrine. They move through the city in processions that seem to phase in and out of reality, their robes shimmering with colors that don't exist in normal spectra, carrying staves topped with crystalline eyes that watch everything. They chant not in Gothic, but in the tongue of demons, words that bypass your ears and carve themselves directly into your thoughts. Every few days, mandatory enlightenment sessions occur. We're gathered in chambers where reality grows thin, forced to kneel before massive hololithic projections that show us visions of change and transformation. The change priests stand before us, arms raised, channeling warp energy that makes the air crackle and our skin tingle with static. They preach about the glory of mutation, the weakness of stagnation, the Emperor's failure to embrace the infinite possibilities of the warp. And worst of all, sometimes their words make sense. Sometimes, exhausted and mentally beaten, I find myself nodding along, thinking, yes, perhaps change is the only constant. Perhaps transformation is evolution. Perhaps we should embrace what's happening to us. Missing these sessions brings immediate consequences. The enforcers, cultists granted minor psychic powers by their sorcerer masters, can sense absence like a bloodhound smells fear. They'll track you down and drag you before a change altar, where you'll be subjected to forced mutation as punishment. I've seen what that looks like. A woman strapped to a platform while magisters channel warp energy through her body, her screams turning to inhuman shrieks as extra limbs sprout, as her face elongates and splits, as colors beneath human perception crawl across her skin. Those who survive such punishment are never the same. Their minds break in specific ways, leaving them as babbling prophets who speak truths no one wants to hear, or as hollow shells who perform their duties with mechanical precision while their eyes reflect impossible vistas. Labor under Tzeentch's rule is a special kind of torment, because the tasks themselves keep changing, and sometimes what you're building today will have never existed tomorrow. We're assigned to work details each morning, though the assignments make increasingly less sense. One day I'm sorting crystals by colors that don't have names. The next, I'm helping to construct a tower that grows downward into the earth instead of up. Another day, I'm tasked with transcribing texts that rewrite themselves as I copy them, the words shifting on the page so that no two readings are ever the same. The work sites themselves are studies in unreality. I've been sent to what they call the mutation forges, factories where the very concept of production has been twisted. Workers stand at stations that phase in and out of existence, assembling components that change shape in their hands. We're building weapons, I think, or maybe ritual implements, but they never look the same twice. A blade you forge in the morning might be a staff by afternoon, or might have transformed into something that exists in 4 dimensions and hurts to perceive. The overseers don't care about consistency. They care about change, about the process of transformation itself. Other times I'm assigned to the reality adjustment crews. We're sent to sections of the hive city where the fabric of space has grown too unstable, where buildings have started merging with adjacent dimensions, or where time flows at different rates in different rooms. Our job is to stabilize these areas, just enough that they're usable again, though stable is a relative term. We use devices the sorcerers provide, crystalline tools that hum with warp energy and make your fingers tingle with pins and needles. Point them at a wall that's phasing through multiple realities, and sometimes the wall chooses one reality and stays there. Sometimes it explodes into shards of possibility. Sometimes it reaches out and pulls you partially into whatever dimension it's touching, and you have to be cut free before you're lost entirely. The work is dangerous in ways that conventional labor never was. Under the Imperium, you might be crushed by machinery or poisoned by chemical exposure. Here, you might find yourself partially transformed because you touched the wrong surface. You might have your perceptions permanently altered by looking too long at certain patterns. You might experience time differently than your coworkers, aging years in subjective seconds, or finding that hours of effort never actually happened because that timeline was pruned by warp fluctuations. I've seen a man reach into a dimensional fold to retrieve a tool and pull his arm back, aged 50 years. The flesh withered and spotted while the rest of him remained young. He couldn't work after that, and we all know what happens to those who can't work. Food is provided during designated break periods, though calling it food is generous. The rations are changed every cycle, literally transformed from one substance to another. Sometimes it's a glowing paste that tastes like memories you never had. Other times it's crystalline shards that dissolve into pure energy on your tongue, filling your mouth with flavors that don't exist in nature. Once, memorably, they served us something that appeared to be normal stew, but every spoonful tasted completely different, and those who ate it spent the next day speaking in riddles as a side effect. You eat because your body still needs fuel, but you never know what eating will do to you. The nourishment might come with visions, with temporary mutations, with implanted thoughts that feel like your own until you realize they're in a language you don't speak. Survival requires adaptation to circumstances that change moment to moment. The first lesson is never trust your senses completely. What you see might be real, might be a psychic projection, might be a glimpse of an alternate timeline bleeding through. The woman working next to you might actually be there, or might be a warp echo of someone who died yesterday, but the timeline hasn't fully updated yet. I've learned to look for tells, subtle signs of what's real and what isn't. Real things cast shadows that point the right direction. Illusions sometimes don't. Real people blink at irregular intervals. Psychic projections often blink in perfect rhythm. These are small anchors in a sea of unreality. The overseers come in various forms, none comforting. Some are tangors, beast-headed mutants that were once human or never were, depending on which timeline you're observing. They stalk between workstations on digitigrade legs, their avian eyes watching for signs of insufficient change worship. Others are rubric marines, the hollow armor shells of Thousand Sons sorcerers, animated by trapped souls and dark rituals. When they approach, you feel the temperature drop and hear the whisper of ancient sand in an hourglass. And worst are the demon overseers, pink horrors or blue horrors that giggle and cackle as they supervise, occasionally reaching out to touch a worker just to see what random mutation might occur. I remember when a man 3 stations down from me simply stopped working, overwhelmed by the madness of it all. He stood there, tools dropping from his hands, staring at nothing while tears ran down his face. A Tzeentch overseer noticed immediately. It approached with its jerky, bird-like movements, cocked its head at an unnatural angle, and spoke in a voice like breaking glass. The man didn't respond. Without ceremony, the Tzeentch gestured, and the air around the worker's head shimmered. His eyes went wide, then wider, then too wide as they began to glow with inner light. His mouth opened to scream, but instead spoke prophecies in a dozen languages simultaneously. They dragged him away to the seer pens, where those touched by uncontrolled visions are kept and used as oracles. We all returned to our tasks, knowing that any one of us could be next. No account of life under Tzeentch would be complete without describing the grand festivals of change. Massive celebrations that occur on no set schedule because time itself flows irregularly here. Attendance is mandatory, enforced by psychic compulsion that makes your feet move toward the gathering sites, even if your mind screams to flee. These events represent the complete abandonment of any pretense of normal reality. When the controlled instability of daily life explodes into warp-fueled chaos that leaves permanent scars on mind and soul. I remember the last festival with perfect clarity, though I'm not sure if it was last week or last year because the timeline around it has become fuzzy, deliberately obscured by the sorcerers who organized it. Announcements appeared everywhere simultaneously, not written or spoken, but simply known. the information appearing in our minds like it had always been there. The grand convocation of infinite possibilities approaches. All shall witness the architect's glory. The entire hive city transformed in preparation. Buildings grew new wings overnight. Streets rearranged themselves into labyrinthine patterns. And the sky above churned with colors that don't exist in nature. We were herded to the central plaza, now expanded to impossible size, stretching further than it should fit within the city's boundaries. Thousands of us packed together, and as we stood waiting, I noticed people changing around me. A man's eyes multiplied, covering his face in blinking orbs. A woman's hair transformed into living flame that burned cold instead of hot. These weren't the slow mutations we'd grown accustomed to, but rapid shifts triggered by the concentration of warp energy saturating the area. The air itself tasted like electricity and forbidden knowledge. The festival began with the arrival of the sorcerers. They materialized rather than walked, stepping out of tears in reality, their ornate armor gleaming with power. Behind them came demon processions, pink horrors tumbling and cackling, flamers hovering on gouts of impossible fire, and towering lords of change whose very presence made geometry scream. The lead sorcerer, a being whose name was a mathematical equation that couldn't be spoken aloud, raised his staff. The crystal atop it pulsed, and suddenly we could see it, the great ocean, the warp itself, overlaid on reality like a double exposure photograph. We saw the tides of chaos, the currents of change, the infinite branching possibilities of every moment. Some people's minds broke immediately from the sight. Others laughed hysterically. I bit my tongue hard enough to taste blood, using the pain to anchor myself to something real. Then came the demonstrations. Sorcerers showcased their mastery over reality and mutation. One gestured at the ground, and it transformed from stone to liquid, to living flesh and back again, in a cycle that never quite repeated. Another called forth illusions so perfect that when touched people, those people became the illusions, transformed into living artworks of light and impossibility. A third sorcerer demonstrated time manipulation, aging and de-aging a volunteer through their entire lifespan in minutes, showing us birth, childhood, adulthood, old age, and death before reversing the process. The volunteer survived, but was never the same, their eyes haunted by the knowledge of their own death. The sacrifices came next, though calling them sacrifices understates the horror. These were transformation rituals on a massive scale. Volunteers, and I use that term loosely, were brought before great mutation altars, crystalline structures that pulsed with eightfold symmetry. The sorcerers and their demon attendants performed ceremonies that channeled pure change directly from Tzeentch himself. We watched as human forms twisted and reformed, becoming chaos spawn, those pitiable creatures so overmutated that consciousness itself becomes impossible. Others transformed into tlangors, their humanity burned away and replaced with bestial fury and avian features. A few, the lucky ones perhaps, became horrors, demon things of laughter and madness. Each transformation was accompanied by screaming that shifted through octaves no human throat should produce, and we were expected to cheer, to celebrate these ascensions as blessings. The grand finale involved a mass summoning. The sorcerers and cultists formed a vast ritual circle, with us civilians as unwilling participants arranged in geometric patterns. They chanted in languages that predated language itself, and the air split open. We felt it, a presence so vast and incomprehensible that perceiving even a fraction of it threatened to unravel our minds. A lord of change, one of Tzeentch's greater demons, forced itself partially into reality. It was magnificent and terrible, a being of impossible size with wings that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, covered in eyes that saw past, present, and future all at once. When it spoke, the words bypassed our ears and carved themselves directly into our consciousness. Prophecies and riddles, and terrible truths about the nature of reality. The demon's presence caused spontaneous mutations in the crowd. I felt my left hand tingling and looked down to see my fingers had become translucent. And through them I could see the bones, the blood vessels, and something else, patterns of light that might have been my soul, or might have been Tzeentch's mark claiming me. Others fared worse, transforming fully, their screams turning to inhuman sounds as beaks erupted from faces or extra limbs tore through clothing. The sorcerers seemed pleased, gathering these newly transformed beings like a harvest. When the demon finally withdrew, reality snapping shut behind it, we were released. But nothing was the same. How could it be? We'd stared into the heart of change itself and survived, though survived is perhaps too generous a word, for what we'd become. The most insidious aspect of Tzeentch's rule isn't the physical changes, terrible as they are, but the alteration of identity itself. Over time, I felt myself becoming something else. The process is gradual enough that you don't notice it happening until you catch yourself thinking thoughts that aren't yours, remembering events that never occurred, speaking words in languages you never learned. This is the true horror, not that your body might change, but that your very self might be rewritten until nothing of the original remains. It started with small things, dreams that felt too vivid, too detailed, too consistent to be normal dreams. I would wake with knowledge I didn't have before, understanding of warp theory or mutation patterns that a simple data scribe should never possess. At first I thought the sorcerers were implanting information during our sleep, some kind of psychic indoctrination. But it felt different than that. It felt like I was remembering things I'd always known, as if a version of me from another timeline was bleeding through and merging with my current self. Then my memories started shifting. I recall my childhood on this world, growing up in the lower hives, but sometimes I also remember growing up on a forge world, surrounded by machinery instead of people. Both memories feel equally real. I remember my parents' faces, but sometimes their features change when I try to picture them. Were my mother's eyes blue, or that strange amber color that shouldn't exist in human genetics? Did I have a sister, or am I imagining her? Or is she from a timeline that was pruned and no longer exists, except in my fractured recollection? The sorcerers say this is a gift, that Tzeentch is showing me the infinite versions of myself across all possible realities. But it feels like theft, like my singular identity is being stolen and replaced with a kaleidoscope of possibilities that all claim to be me. The physical mutations are almost easier to deal with, because at least they're visible, measurable. 3 months ago, or what I think was 3 months, I developed a small patch of iridescent scales on my left shoulder. They shimmer with colors that shift based on my emotional state, currently showing a sickly combination of fear blue and resignation gray. Last week, I woke to find I could see partially into the ultraviolet spectrum, revealing patterns and sigils painted on walls that are invisible to normal human vision. These marks are everywhere, I realize now, a hidden layer of reality that only the changed can perceive. They're instructions, prayers to Tzeentch, written in colors beyond human understanding. Others have fared worse or better, depending on your perspective. There's a man in my work detail whose right arm has transformed entirely into crystalline structure, translucent and angular, functioning perfectly well, but clearly no longer flesh. He can use it to sense warp fluctuations, feeling them as vibrations through the crystal. The cult recruiters visited him, offered him a place among their number, but he refused. Refused! in a place where refusal usually means death or worse. But they let him go, apparently amused by his defiance, or perhaps knowing that in time, as the mutations progress, he'll have no choice but to embrace what he's becoming. I've developed coping mechanisms, rituals to maintain some sense of self. Every morning I recite facts about my life, trying to reinforce the memories before they shift again. My name is Callus Ven. I was born in Hive Tertius. I worked in the administratum. I had a small office on level 47. But even as I speak, doubt creeps in. Was it level 47 or 74? Did I work in the administratum? Or was I a manufactorum supervisor? The uncertainty gnaws at me. I keep a journal, hidden in a hollow in the wall, writing down everything I remember each day. When I read old entries, sometimes they contradict what I know to be true. Sometimes they're in handwriting that isn't quite mine. Sometimes they describe events I have no memory of, or worse, that I do remember, but know never happened. The psychological toll is immense. You start to question everything. Is the person you're talking to real or a projection? Is this moment actually happening, or are you experiencing a memory of it, or a possible future? Did yesterday even exist, or did the timeline shift and create a new past where yesterday was completely different? The sorcerers exploit this uncertainty. They tell us that truth is malleable, that reality is just one interpretation among infinite possibilities, that the only constant is change itself. And the horrifying part is that here, in this place, they're right. Reality does shift. The past does rewrite itself. Change is the only certainty. Trust becomes impossible. How can you trust anyone when their very identity might be in flux? I had a friend once, at least I think I did, a woman named Mira who worked sorting crystals. We would whisper to each other during breaks, sharing quiet observations about the madness around us, finding comfort in solidarity. But one day, she looked at me with no recognition in her eyes, and when I spoke her name, she corrected me. "My name is Lisa," she said, confused. "Have we met before?" Her entire history had been rewritten. She remembered a completely different life, different relationships, a different path that led her to the same work detail. Was she still the same person? Had she ever been Mira at all? Or had I imagined our friendship? I don't know. I can't know. Some people embrace the changes. They reason, perhaps correctly, that fighting transformation only prolongs the agony. Better to accept, to flow with the changes, to become what Tzeentch wants you to become. I've seen former resistance members, people who swore they'd never submit, gradually shift their positions. First, they stop actively resisting. Then they participate in rituals with fake enthusiasm that slowly becomes real. Then one day, you realize they're true believers, preaching the gospel of change with genuine fervor, their old selves buried so deep that even they don't remember who they used to be. Is that surrender or evolution, destruction or transcendence? The question haunts me because I feel myself sliding toward the same fate, and I'm no longer sure I have the strength to resist. If you want to understand true horror, venture into the deep zones of a Tzeentch-controlled hive, the areas where reality has completely broken down and the warp bleeds through without restraint. The upper levels, where most of us exist, maintain a twisted semblance of structure. But the deep zones, the forgotten districts, and abandoned levels, they've become something else entirely. Places where the laws of physics are suggestions at best, where time flows in loops or not at all, where the very concept of physical space has been replaced by something that exists more in thought than matter. I've only been to the deep zones twice, both times on forced expeditions to retrieve artifacts or materials that the sorcerers couldn't or wouldn't collect themselves. The first descent was to recover crystallized warp fragments from what used to be the commercial district. Our group of 20 entered through maintenance shafts that twisted at angles that made your inner ear scream. Gravity shifted multiple times during the descent, sometimes pulling us down, sometimes sideways, once even reversing entirely, so we had to crawl on what had been the ceiling. The deep zones don't look like any architecture should. Corridors branch into themselves, creating loops that shouldn't be possible. Rooms are larger on the inside than the outside, or smaller, or exist in multiple places simultaneously. I watched a doorway that led to 3 different locations depending on which angle you approached it from. The walls themselves are alive with change, constantly shifting between materials. Stone to metal, to flesh, to something that might be solidified thought. And the colors, Emperor preserve me, the colors exist in spectrums that human eyes were never meant to perceive. Staring too long at certain surfaces makes your brain hurt as it tries to process impossible hues. The inhabitants of the deep zones are those who couldn't or wouldn't adapt to the changes above. Failed cultists whose mutations went too far. Citizens who fled mandatory rituals and somehow survived in the depths. Chaos spawn. Those pitiable creatures mutated beyond any hope of intelligence, crawling through the madness on legs that change with every step. But worst are the changelings, people who've been exposed to so much warp energy that they no longer have a fixed form. They shift constantly, moment to moment, their bodies cycling through different shapes, different faces, different species. Some retain enough consciousness to beg for help, their pleas coming from mouths that reshape themselves, even as they speak. Our expedition leader, a cultist with brass augmetics replacing half his face, warned us not to trust our perceptions. Reality down here is negotiable, he said, his voice crackling through a Vox grill. If you see something impossible, it's probably real. If you see something normal, it's probably a trap. He was right. We encountered a section of corridor that looked perfectly stable, ordinary gray rockcrete, like any imperial structure. 3 members of our group walked into it and simply vanished, phased out of existence. We could hear their screams, distant and distorted, coming from somewhere else entirely. The cultist shook his head and we moved on, leaving them to whatever fate the warp had chosen. The warp fragments we sought were found in a chamber that existed in multiple time periods simultaneously. I could see the room as it was during the Imperium, clean and functional. I could see it during the invasion, burning and broken. And I could see it in the present, transformed into something from a fever dream, all wrong angles and surfaces that hurt to touch. The fragments themselves were beautiful and terrible, crystallized pieces of raw warp energy that pulsed with inner light. Touching them bare-handed meant instant mutation, so we used tongs and sealed containers. One worker's glove tore, and his hand made contact. His entire arm transformed into a tentacle covered in screaming mouths before we could pull him away. The cultist examined him clinically, then slit his throat. Contaminated was his only explanation. The second expedition was worse because it was voluntary, sort of. They offered better rations and a day of rest to anyone who'd venture into the labyrinth of infinite paths to map new sections. I was desperate enough, hungry enough, to accept. The labyrinth is exactly what it sounds like. A maze that constantly reconfigures itself, with paths that lead to places that shouldn't exist. We were given devices that supposedly tracked our position, crystalline compasses that pointed toward baseline reality instead of magnetic north. They worked most of the time. In the labyrinth, I saw things I still can't fully process. A room where dozens of versions of the same person existed simultaneously, each one slightly different, all of them equally real and equally aware of the others. A corridor that aged you as you walked down it, then de-aged you on the return journey, but never quite back to where you started. A chamber filled with living equations, mathematical formulas that had achieved consciousness, and whispered theorems that could drive you mad if you understood them. And everywhere, the sensation of being watched by intelligences vast and alien, beings from the warp who observed our struggles with amusement or hunger or incomprehensible motivations. We lost half our group in the labyrinth, not to violence or mutation, though those claimed a few, but to simply becoming lost. The paths split and reformed behind us. Someone would be there one moment, and gone the next, and no amount of backtracking could find them. Were they transported to another section, to another planet, to another dimension entirely? The cultist leading us didn't seem concerned. Tzeentch has claimed them for his own purposes, he said with something like pride. Their fate serves the greater plan. I wanted to scream at him, to demand we search, but I knew it was futile. In the deep zones, loss is just another form of change. Those who return from these expeditions are never the same. The exposure to concentrated warp energy leaves marks that go beyond physical mutation. I dream in non-Euclidean geometry now, my sleeping mind constructing spaces that couldn't exist. I sometimes see probabilities, branching possibilities of what might happen in the next moment, dozens of futures overlaid on the present, like translucent images. It's maddening because I can't tell which future is real until it actually happens. And sometimes multiple futures seem to happen simultaneously before collapsing into one. The sorcerers prize those who survive the deep zones. They see us as touched by Tzeentch's essence, blessed with insights into the nature of change and reality. Some survivors are recruited into the cults, their madness interpreted as prophetic vision. Others are used as test subjects, studied to understand how mortal minds cope with exposure to pure chaos. I've been questioned 3 times by sorcerer interrogators who wanted to know what I saw, what I felt, whether I experienced any moments of clarity or revelation. I told them everything because lying to a telepath is impossible. They seemed pleased, made notations in floating data slates, and released me back to my work detail. But I know they're watching me now, waiting to see if I'll be useful or if I'll simply break like so many others. Years into Tzeentch's rule, if years even mean anything anymore when time itself has become fluid. I've come to understand that there is no end game, no final state we're approaching. This is the point. Tzeentch doesn't want to transform us into something specific. He wants the transformation itself to be eternal, endless change for its own sake. We are caught in a cycle of perpetual mutation where nothing is ever complete, nothing is ever finished, nothing is ever stable. The Imperium isn't coming to save us. I've accepted that truth, however painful. Even if they could reclaim this world, even if they could somehow purge the warp taint and restore reality to its proper shape, they would never accept us. We've been changed too fundamentally. Our very genetics have been rewritten by exposure to chaos. Our minds have touched the warp and been touched by it in return. The Inquisition would see us as irredeemable, contaminated beyond salvation. The kindest fate we could hope for would be immediate execution. More likely we'd be subjected to mind scrubbing and servitor conversion, our consciousness burned away and our bodies repurposed. In a way, that might be a mercy, an end to the constant uncertainty and change. Resistance still exists, though calling it organized would be absurd. How can you organize when you can't trust your own memories or perceptions? How can you plan when tomorrow might literally rewrite yesterday? But there are moments of defiance, small acts that accomplish nothing strategic but preserve some fragment of who we were. I sometimes deliberately think imperial prayers, hidden deep in my mind, where I hope the sorcerers can't detect them. Others scratch the Emperor's aquila into hidden corners, knowing the symbol will probably transform or fade, but doing it anyway. One brave fool even tried to sabotage a mutation altar, though of course he was caught. His punishment was to be shown all the possible futures where his sabotage succeeded, let him experience the hope of victory, and then have all those timelines collapsed, so none of them were real. He lives now in the seer pens, babbling about victories that never were. Daily life continues its impossible rhythm. We wake, if we slept, to tasks that change based on Tzeentch's whims. We eat food that might alter us with every bite. We work on projects that remake themselves as we build them. We attend rituals where reality itself is negotiable. The cycle repeats, except it never really repeats because nothing here ever happens the same way twice. Some of us have adapted, finding ways to function in the madness. Others have broken, their minds shattered beyond repair. And a few, like me, exist in the narrow space between, holding on to sanity by our fingernails while feeling it slip away grain by grain. The changes in my body continue. I have 4 eyes now, the extra 2 appearing over the course of what I think was a month. They see different spectrums, different layers of reality. My left hand has developed an extra joint in each finger, making it more dexterous but also more alien. My skin shifts colors based on my emotional state and the ambient warp energy. I'm becoming something other than human, and the terrifying part is that it doesn't horrify me as much as it should. I'm growing used to it, accepting it, and that acceptance feels like the final betrayal of who I was. Others have transformed more dramatically. There's a woman in my hab block whose face has become a kaleidoscope, literally fractured into geometric pieces that rotate and shift, showing different expressions simultaneously. A man whose body phases in and out of reality at random, sometimes solid, sometimes translucent, sometimes gone entirely for minutes at a time before snapping back. These changes are no longer punished or even remarked upon. They're simply what happens here, the new normal in a place where normal has lost all meaning. The question that haunts me when I have moments of clarity is whether I'm still me. If my body is changed, if my memories are rewritten, if my thoughts are influenced or implanted. At what point does Callus Ven cease to exist and something else wearing his name take his place? The philosophers of the Imperium debated questions of identity and consciousness in theoretical terms. Here, it's a practical concern with immediate stakes. Am I the same person I was 5 years ago? Am I even the same person I was yesterday? I don't know. The uncertainty gnaws at me. Some have found peace through acceptance. They've stopped fighting, stopped resisting, stopped trying to hold on to their old selves. They embrace the changes, welcome the mutations, pray genuinely to the architect of fate for more transformation. Are they happy? In a twisted way, perhaps. They've surrendered the burden of identity, accepted that the self is fluid and changeable. Part of me envies them. Fighting is exhausting. Holding on to sanity requires constant effort. Just letting go, allowing myself to become whatever Tzeentch wants me to be, would be so much easier. But I can't. Not yet. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the mutations and the implanted thoughts and the rewritten memories, there's still a core of something that screams, "This is wrong." That remembers what it meant to be human, to have a stable identity, to exist in a reality that made sense. That core is small and growing smaller, eroded by time and change. But it persists. And as long as it persists, I'll keep fighting, even if the fight is just to remember my name one more day, to write in my journal one more time, to whisper one more prayer to an emperor who probably can't hear me. If anyone reads this, if these words somehow survive the changes and reach someone in a saner place, understand what we endured. Understand that Tzeentch's victory isn't dramatic or sudden. It's slow and insidious, a gradual dissolution of everything that makes us human. He doesn't destroy civilizations. He transforms them until destruction would be a mercy. We are his experiment, his playthings, his demonstration of the futility of trying to remain unchanged in a universe of infinite possibility. Remember us as we were, not as we've become. Remember that we resisted as long as we could. Remember that even in the face of changes that remake reality itself, some of us tried to hold on to our humanity. It may seem like a small thing, meaningless in the grand scheme of galactic war. But for us, for those of us trapped in Tzeentch's maze with no exit, that resistance is everything. The future is uncertain. It always is under Tzeentch's rule. Tomorrow I might wake to find myself completely transformed, my mind rewritten, my very soul reshaped. Or I might wake to find the Imperium has arrived, bringing cleansing fire that will erase us along with our tormentors. Or I might not wake at all, finally consumed by the changes I've been fighting. All possibilities exist simultaneously until the moment arrives and collapses them into a single reality. But tonight, in this moment, I am still Callus Van. I am still human, mostly. I still remember who I was. And I will write these words, hide them away, and hope that somehow they survive to tell our story. The story of a world that changed, and the people who changed with it, and the terrible price paid for transformation without end. This is life under Tzeentch, an existence of perpetual flux, where nothing is certain except uncertainty itself, not ending with hope or despair, but with the understanding that even endings are just another form of change, and change never truly stops.